"Sign the divorce papers, Claire. I don't want to be married to you anymore," Daniel, my husband of 6 years, said. The divorce papers sat on the table in front of me, and Daniel sat across from me with the look of a man who had already won. Beside him was Sarah, his pregnant mistress, one hand resting on her stomach, her eyes red at the edges like she had been crying recently or was planning to start. She kept her head slightly down, playing the perfect picture of a woman who felt terrible about all of this, who never wanted anyone to get hurt. Daniel's mother, a woman who had made my life miserable since the day I started dating her son, stood near the window with her arms crossed, and she had been talking since I walked in. She said I had wasted the best years of her boy's life. She said I had taken up space in a marriage I was never equipped for. She said Sarah was giving her family what I never could, and didn't I have enough self-respect to step aside gracefully instead of making everyone sit through this? Daniel slid the papers closer to me across the table. "Let's not make this more than it has to be." Sarah looked up at him, her voice soft and careful. "Daniel, I love you so much for choosing our growing family. I'm sorry, Claire, but you have to be considerate of our situation." I looked at Sarah and her performance. Then I looked at Daniel's mother. Then I looked at Daniel, the man I had sacrificed my youth to. I picked up the pen. "Sure," I said. Daniel blinked. His mother stopped talking. Sarah's hand stilled on her stomach. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What?" "Sure," I said again, and I pulled the papers toward me. The smugness on his face cracked at the edges, because this was not what was supposed to happen. He had prepared for tears, for bargaining, for me to remind him of everything I had given up and beg him to reconsider. But he was not going to get that. You see, in this life I had been reborn. In my past life, I gave Daniel everything. I ran his household, managed his family, swallowed every insult that came my way and called it love. Daniel's mother treated their home like a stage and me like the help, and I smiled through all of it because I believed that was what a good wife did. Then the whispers started. Why wasn't I pregnant yet? What was wrong with me? Daniel's mother made sure the question followed me everywhere, to family dinners, to gatherings, to quiet conversations that went silent the moment I walked into a room. I went to the doctors. The doctors told me I was fine, that the problem was not mine. The doctor had said it was customary for both partners to get tested, and I made the mistake of saying so out loud. Daniel's mother raised her hand to me the day I suggested Daniel get tested. I felt the shock of the sound before I felt the pain on my cheek. She had actually raised her hand to me, and Daniel stood there and said nothing, and I learned very quickly never to say those words again. So I carried the blame. I carried it for years. Then Sarah appeared. Daniel brought that pregnant woman into our home almost like a way to gloat, like he was saying, "I have been with you and you gave me nothing, and here is someone carrying my child." It felt like a direct response to me asking him to get tested. He told me to get used to it, said it was my fault anyway. Wasn't I the one who was incapable of giving his parents grandchildren, after everything they had done for us? So like the fool I was, I tried. I tried to adjust to a pregnant woman and my husband's mistress living under my roof. Daniel had been my first love, the boy who had looked at me like I was everything when we were young, and I told myself he was stressed, that he was lost, that he would remember what we had and come back to me. I waited. I kept the house, kept the family together, kept my mouth shut, and I waited. When he handed me divorce papers the first time, I refused to sign them. I had no money of my own, no career, nothing outside of that marriage because I had quietly dismantled my own life to build his. I had nowhere to go and nothing to go back to, so I stayed. Even when Sarah moved in, even when they treated me like I was already gone, I stayed and I cooked and I cleaned and I pretended not to notice the way they looked at me. One evening, I overheard Sarah on the phone with her friends, laughing, her voice loose and careless. She said Daniel was impotent. She said she had spent one night with her ex-boyfriend and that was all it took. She said the baby had nothing to do with Daniel, and she found that very funny. I stood in that hallway and understood everything. I should have walked out the door right then. Instead, I made the mistake of letting her see my face. Sarah knew I had heard her, And 3 days later, a car came out of nowhere and hit me, and the last thing I saw before everything went dark was Sarah's face behind the wheel, completely calm. I died in that life with nothing. No one believed me, no one fought for me, and the people I had given everything to made sure I left this world with less than I came into it with. So when I came back, I made myself one promise. I was never going to be that woman again. I scratched and signed my name on the divorce papers in front of me. It felt almost freeing that in this life I would unburden myself of the bondage of being together with a terrible man like Daniel. I had long since lost any hope in stupid things like love. I slid the papers back across the table and set the pen down beside them. Daniel stared at me like I had done something offensive. Sarah leaned forward. "Just so we are clear, Claire, everything in this house belongs to Daniel. You are not entitled to take a single thing that isn't yours." Daniel's mother nodded from her corner. "She knows better than to steal from my son. She never contributed anything to this family anyway, only a waste of space." I ignored Sarah immediately, staring at my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, even becoming the caregiver of her husband in the hospital while she sat in the living room laughing and watching TV. I really was a fool, slaving for people who did not care even an ounce for me. "It's okay," I said. "I don't want anything. I will leave how I came, and I won't ask any of you to return what I lost in this house." Daniel slammed his hand on the table so hard Sarah jolted. "What do you mean by that? I married you, an orphan, and gave you a home, warm meals, and a family." I laughed at the ridiculousness of it. Who was the wronged one between me and him? "Can you return my dignity?" I asked loudly. "Your what?" he said, barely able to reply as his mother's laughter rang through the house. "Your dignity," she repeated, her voice dripping with mockery. "Take off the ring. It doesn't belong to you. We spent a fortune on it," his mother said. "That ring belongs to me now," Sarah said. "I'm the one who was able to give this family a child." I looked at the ring on my finger and slid it off. I wanted to throw it at Daniel's smug face, but I didn't have the energy for that. I had come to such an indifference that I simply didn't care. I dropped it coldly on the table and stood up. His mother moved close beside me like a bodyguard. "I'll check your bag before you leave." "There's no need for that," I said, already walking toward the door. "There's nothing here worth taking anyway." I left that house with nothing. Like I had said, I didn't want anything from them. Not that Daniel had been a doting husband who had spoilt me with nice things occasionally. No, in that house, I was Daniel's personal maid, his mother's worker, and his father's caregiver. Marcus Reed's office was on the 14th floor of a building that Daniel had always pointed at when we drove past it. "One day I'm going to work on that top floor and become a big guy," he would say. "For now, I'm just helping the small guys, but only for now." Marcus was Daniel's boss, but not in any personal sense. Daniel was just one of the many employees Marcus's company employed. A normal low-level worker who believed so completely in his own potential that he spent most of our drives home telling me about the benefits that came with working on the top floor. The retirement bonuses, the holiday packages, the company luxury apartments. He talked about Marcus so much, and with such detailed admiration that I had never once let slip that I knew exactly who Marcus Reed was, that I had known him long before Daniel ever typed his name into a search engine. The one time Daniel had actually been in the same room as Marcus, at a new employee dinner 3 years into our marriage, I had stood beside my husband and acted like a stranger. Marcus had looked across that room and recognized me immediately. I saw it happen on his face, and I had looked away. He caught up with me afterward, away from the crowd, and asked why I had cut ties with him, why I had acted like I didn't know him. I hadn't given him a good answer then. I wasn't sure I had one now. Daniel had spent 3 years trying to get a personal meeting with Marcus, and never managed it. I walked in without an appointment, and his assistant waved me through before I even finished saying my name. She knew who I was. Marcus had made sure of that a long time ago. Marcus was at his desk when I came in. He looked up and something in his face settled. the particular stillness that came over him when it was just the two of us, like he had been holding himself at a careful distance all day and could finally put it down. That was the thing about Marcus that the rest of the world never got to see. In Daniel's circles, people spoke about him with a particular kind of careful respect. Everyone feared him. He came from a powerful family and could ruin someone with a single call. He could also change a life with that same ease, and maybe that was why they called him the devil, because the power to help and the power to destroy lived in the same hands. Daniel would spend one breath boasting about how only he among his colleagues could meet Marcus's steep expectations, and the next breath complaining about how relentless and cold the man was. I could tell even Daniel was a little terrified of him. What Daniel never knew, what none of those people knew, was that Marcus and I had grown up on the same street, sat beside each other in the same classrooms for years, spent 2 years at the same university before he told me he had feelings for me. I had said no. Daniel came from a powerful family, and I was someone living off the charity of a late parent's elderly friend, a kind woman who had given me a roof but not a future, and there was no way a family like Marcus's would ever approve of someone like me. So I told him I liked us better as friends, and then I cut him off before either of us could change our minds about it. I thought I had made the wise decision, for him and for myself. Then I made the mistake of falling in love with Daniel, and slowly lost everything, including myself. And by the time I understood what I had done wrong, I was lying cold in my own blood after being hit by a car. Marcus stood up when I came in. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me the way he always had, taking inventory, making sure everything was still where it was supposed to be. "Claire," he said, "it's been a while." "Marcus, hi," I said, and sat down across from him. He gave me a moment, which was something I had always appreciated about him. He never rushed at things. Then he sat back down, folded his hands on the desk, and said, "Is everything all right?" I got myself together. I was here to make a deal. I couldn't fall apart and take advantage of his soft spot for me. I knew it was there, and I refused to use it that way. "I have a deal for you," I said. "I'll pretend to be your fiancée and future wife, but I need something back." Marcus got up, came closer, and sat down in the chair beside me, pulling it closer. "Claire, I haven't seen you in a while. The last time I saw you, I gave you my number and you never called. I told you to visit my office and you never did. And now you finally come and you want to be my pretend wife. I'm going to need more than that, Claire." He tapped his fingers on my nose, which reminded me of old times. "I don't think you can be my fiancé if you have a husband," he said, with the particular patience he had for no one else. "I don't have a husband anymore. I signed divorce papers today, and it will be processed shortly." He looked at me, with a hint of confusion on his face. "Tell me what happened, Claire," he said. "All of it." I told him enough. The clean version: my husband had a pregnant mistress, and he gave me divorce papers. He had made me sign a prenup when I was young and naive before we had money. He had known I had no one to fight for me and no money for a good lawyer. I didn't tell him about my past life. I didn't tell him how pathetic the full version was. I just told him everything but that. He listened without letting anything show on his face, and I was grateful for that. If he had shown me any pity, I would have felt pathetic. He stayed quiet for a beat after I stopped talking, then nodded once, slowly. "You don't have to pretend to be my fiancé," he said. "I know you want to help me with the inheritance situation, but that would be taking advantage of you. I'll get you a good lawyer, Claire, and accommodation, and a job if you need something to keep you busy. You're my friend. I just want to help you the way you helped me years ago by being my friend." I had overheard Marcus discussing the inheritance condition with a lawyer once. His grandfather had tied everything to a condition. Marcus needed to be married, or at minimum credibly engaged, while his grandfather was still alive. Or his uncle would move on the estate and take everything he had been quietly positioning himself for. "No, Marcus, this is the deal I want," I said. "I know how much you care about me and how much you are willing to do for me, but I don't want to be the woman who can't fight for herself anymore." And mostly because a transaction felt like the only structure I could believe in right now. I'll be your fake fiancé, and in exchange, I'll take advantage of your resources. This way we both get something in return, I said. Clear terms, mutual benefit, no room for things to get complicated. He was quiet for a moment, then a smile came through. When you're stubborn about something, there's no convincing you. If you're going to be my fake fiancé, you're going to do everything that entails. Don't think I'll go easy on you just because I've known you since I was a boy. I smiled. That was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't the same woman anymore. Dying had changed me. So it's a deal, I said. A deal, he said, stretching out his hand to me. And when I put my hand in his, I felt a cool relief wash over me. I knew I couldn't trust anyone anymore, but why did I want to trust Marcus? I spent the next few weeks preparing for my slow revenge and settling into the role of Marcus's fiancé, which was how I found myself living in his apartment. He was different at home than the man who wore sharp suits and never smiled at work functions. At home, he wore sweatpants and kept his hair unkempt. He ate dinner with me and watched whatever show was on. And after that, we studied, going through the list of people I needed to impress and people I could safely ignore. At the top of that list was his grandfather. I had looked at his grandfather's photo with a quiet sadness that had nothing to do with strategy. I knew, because I had lived through it once already, that he didn't have much time left. In my past life, Marcus had been so gutted by the loss that he hadn't even fought back when his uncle moved on the company, just stood there and let it happen while he grieved. Maybe that was part of why I had chosen this arrangement, not just for my own revenge, but to satisfy the guilt I had carried for abandoning him during the worst moment of his life. This time, I would be there. But today, I had to go to court. I had turned down Marcus's lawyer because I didn't need one. I wasn't fighting for anything. I wanted a clean break, nothing attached, nothing left behind. Marcus had offered to come with me, and I had turned that down too. This was my fight, and I needed to walk into it alone. Daniel's face when he saw me walk in by myself told me everything. He had counted on exactly that. He was already there with Sarah on his arm, her stomach leading the way, his mother seated beside them like she had come to watch something entertaining. Daniel raised an eyebrow. So you're alone again. As you can see, I said, barely looking at him, and sat down. Sarah looked me up and down, so did his mother. Marcus had arranged a wardrobe for me, and I had picked something simple, but it must have still been too much for them. His mother leaned toward Sarah and said loud enough to carry, "Seems she must have gone into prostitution after she left the house." Sarah snickered, then went quiet when the judge walked in. The judge was an older woman with a stern face and the bored energy of someone who had seen this exact situation too many times to find it interesting. "Let's get started," she said. Daniel's lawyer laid everything out with the confidence of someone who had been paid very well. The prenup, the asset division, the terms, and somewhere in the middle of it, all a claim that I had defiled the marriage by failing to give Daniel a family. I sat with my hands folded and said nothing. The lawyer pushed further with claims that had no evidence behind them, and the judge told him flatly to submit proof and called a recess. In the hallway, Daniel found me before I could find a quiet corner. "Apologize to me now and I'll reconsider," he said, dropping his voice like he was offering me something valuable. "Don't throw everything away over pride, Claire. I'll take you back. Just say you're sorry, say you were stupid for thinking you could ever live without me." I looked at him and laughed, not performance, genuine amusement at the size of the man's ego. "Have you apologized to me, Daniel?" I said, and my voice came out quieter than I expected, but it carried in that hallway. I felt him shift. "Have you apologized for bringing a pregnant whore into our home? For letting your family call me barren for 6 years when you never once got tested? For disrespecting our marriage every single day it existed?" He laughed. "So that's it, you're jealous that she could do what you couldn't." He stepped closer. "Well, since you're no whore, you already know no man will ever want you. You're old and faded, Claire, you're something from the past. You're not even attractive enough to be kept warm at night. I'm doing you a favor." I raised my hand to hit him, then stopped. Was this idiot worth my anger? If anything, I wanted to turn that hand on myself, for believing every single word he had just said in my past life. But I didn't even get the chance to reply because I heard the room shift behind me, a particular change in air pressure that came with someone important walking in. Daniel's eyes moved past me, and the confidence slipped off his face in real time. Sarah appeared at his side, her voice going syrupy. "Baby, what is your boss doing here?" Daniel straightened up, his smug look returning. "He must have heard about my hard time. Divorce is a difficult thing for men too," he said, nodding to himself like that made sense. Marcus walked up, and I felt Daniel's smile brighten in anticipation of a sympathetic conversation with his boss, right up until Marcus stopped beside me and put his arm around my shoulder. I turned to him. "I told you not to come." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to. Let's get this over with so we can celebrate." Daniel's mouth dropped. "Excuse me, Mr. Reed, how do you know this person?" Marcus turned to look at him, his face doing that thing it did when he found someone beneath his attention. "Who are you?" I held back my laugh watching Daniel's face cycle through several things. "I work for your company, sir, and the person you have your arm around is my wife." "Ex-wife," I said. Sarah's face soured at that. She looked at Marcus and put on her softest, most helpful voice. "I don't know who you are, but you should know. That woman cannot have children. She must not have told you out of shame, but you should know, just so you are aware of what you are getting into." The hallway went quiet. Marcus looked at Sarah, then looked at her stomach, then looked back at her face. "We'll see about that," he said, and turned away from her like she had already stopped being interesting. Something moved through my chest. I had spent 6 years being defined by those words. "She cannot have children," had heard them so many times in so many rooms that some quiet part of me had started to accept them as fact. Marcus hadn't flinched, hadn't asked, hadn't even paused. He hadn't looked at me like I was a damaged product. Back inside the courtroom, the judge looked at the expanded audience and sighed. "So we have more people than before." Then Daniel stood up without warning and went on a rant, telling the judge I had been unfaithful, that I had a fiancé, that he deserved damages, his own lawyer pulling at his sleeve trying to get him to stop, until the judge brought her gavel down so hard everything went silent. "Let me understand this," she said, looking at Daniel with the patience of a woman who had run out of it. "You cheated on your wife, got another woman pregnant, and you want to make claims based on infidelity." Daniel opened his mouth and shut it. The judge turned to me. "Miss Clare, it is not too late to adjust your claims. Looking at this situation, you have clearly been wronged." I stood up. "No, Your Honor. I do not want anything from that man. I gave everything and received nothing in return. I am calling this a failed investment. I want a clean divorce so I can start my new life." I watched Daniel grit his teeth. The judge sighed and moved forward. The divorce was finalized. Outside, Daniel followed us into the hallway, his composure completely gone. "You'll regret this, Claire. You think this ends well for you? You think he actually wants you? It wasn't even a year before I was sick of you." Marcus turned to look at him, and I saw something flicker across Daniel's face, a man suddenly aware he had said the wrong thing to the wrong person. "Watch your words," Marcus said, his voice even. "I'll forgive you since this is the heat of the moment, but only a fool gets tired of a diamond and trades it for a stone." A week after the divorce was finalized, Daniel's mother called me. I knew she would. In my past life, around this same time, Daniel had gotten a terrible kidney stone that required surgery, and I had ignored the pending divorce papers, ignored Sarah lounging around my house too pregnant to lift a finger, and gone running. I had sat by his bedside, managed his medications, coordinated with his doctors, held that entire family together while his pregnant mistress did absolutely nothing. I had done all of it because I still believed, underneath everything, that he was still my husband, and that love meant showing up even when you shouldn't. This time, I let her finish her sentence before I spoke. "Your husband is sick. He is in the hospital. Aren't you going to come? He needs someone to take care of him," she said, her voice carrying that particular blend of demand and entitlement I had spent 6 years learning to absorb. "What are you talking about?" I said, genuinely sounding confused. She clicked her tongue like I had said something offensive. Daniel is in pain, his kidney stone perforated. I know you must already be rushing over, so stop and get these things first. I'll send you a list. I cut her off before she could go further with the absolute nonsense coming out of her mouth. That's what I don't get. You keep saying husband, but I don't have one. I think you have the wrong number. Claire, is this really the time for this? Her voice screeched on the other end. I didn't hear the rest, because I ended the call immediately and blocked her number. Marcus had asked me once, early on, what I actually wanted for myself, not the arrangement, not the revenge, just for me. I had told him a coffee shop, something small and mine, somewhere that had nothing to do with anyone else's ambitions. He had handed me the keys to one of his locations the following week and told me to do whatever I wanted with it. No conditions, no strings attached, just the keys and a smile. I know you'd do great, Claire, he said. I still remember you making me those iced teas whenever I was having a bad day. You added way too much mint. It tasted like toothpaste, but somehow you always cheered me up. That was the thing about Marcus. He never made me feel like receiving something from him cost me anything. The shop had been open for a while now, and it was doing well, better than I had expected, full most mornings, a steady crowd in the afternoons, regulars who knew my name. I was behind the counter on a Thursday when Daniel's mother walked in. She didn't see me. She went straight to my assistant manager, a quiet young woman named Pam who was very good at her job and not at all equipped for what was about to happen to her. Excuse me, Daniel's mother said, planting herself at the counter. Do you have a Claire working here? Black hair, boring brown eyes, looks like she's completely given up on life. Pam kept her professional smile in place. There's no one here matching that description, but we do have a Claire who works here. Would you like me to get her for you? Daniel's mother leaned on the counter. Pam, you look like the boss around here. Let me tell you something about that girl Claire before you go and fetch her. She is a terrible human being. Her husband is in the hospital right now, lying there in pain, crying out, and she hasn't gone to see him once, not once. She pressed her fingers to the corners of her eyes and let out a small sob. You work in customer satisfaction. How can you let someone that heartless represent your business? What does that say about this place? Pam looked at me over Daniel's mother's shoulder, her eyes wide. I set down what I was holding and walked over. Call the police, I said to Pam. There's a nuisance in the shop. Daniel's mother spun around and pointed at me. There she is. That's the despicable woman right there. She turned back to the customers, spreading her arms wide. That's the woman who abandoned her husband in the hospital. She left him there rotting in a bed while she plays dress up with a job. She turned back to Pam. You're the manager, right? Do the right thing. If not, I'll camp here until you do. Pam, I said, call security. It's obvious we have a psych ward patient on the loose. Her face went red. Pam, why are you letting this woman give you instructions? Pam looked at her, genuinely confused. Are you talking about my boss? She is the one who manages this store, and it's obvious you are causing a disturbance to our customers. With that, she walked to the phone on the wall, and I could hear her whispering to security. I watched it land on Daniel's mother's face, the understanding of who I was in this room, that I was not an employee she could have dismissed. Something shifted behind her eyes, and she turned to face the customers instead. Her voice went up. This woman abandoned her sick son, she said to the room, spreading her hands out like she was presenting evidence. My son is lying in a hospital bed. He had emergency surgery, and she hasn't visited him once, not once. She left him for a rich man and hasn't looked back. A woman at the window table looked up from her coffee. She walked out on her sick husband. A man near the door repeated slowly, looking at me. I let her finish every single word. Then I looked around at the customers and spoke clearly. She wants me to go nurse the husband who got another woman pregnant, then handed me divorce papers in my own home, with his pregnant mistress sitting right there beside him. The room went quiet. Then it turned. A man like that deserved to be left in that hospital bed, the woman at the window table said. These mothers, the lady near the door said, shaking his head. They raise terrible sons and then act confused when nobody wants them. Someone near the window already had their phone out and was recording. Daniel's mother looked around, realized the room had moved, and left quickly without another word. I watched her go, then turned back to my customers with a warm smile. Coffee refills on the house for everyone who had to sit through that. The room laughed, someone clapped, and just like that the tension broke. I kept smiling until I was back behind the counter. Inside, I was not smiling. She had walked into the one thing I had built that was entirely mine and tried to use it against me in front of strangers. That was a mistake she was going to regret. I picked up my phone and rang Marcus's number. Remember when I said I wanted to take advantage of your resources? There was silence for a moment, then I heard muffled voices in the background and realized he was in a meeting. "Give me a moment," he said, not to me. "Yes, Claire, I remember," he said after a few seconds. "I need you to find someone for me," I said. "The real father of my ex-husband's future grandchild." There was a pause. "I'll handle it," he said, "but I'll need something in return." A smile came to my face, glad he was still humoring our deal. Something always had to be exchanged between us. I really wished he would stop thawing at my frozen heart. "Oh, yeah." Marcus's payment was that I had to attend his family dinner 3 days later. His grandfather wanted to meet me, and while I had been playing the role of his fiancée well enough in public, I was still a recently divorced woman, and Marcus's family were not the forgiving type. "How bad is it going to be?" I asked. "Bad," Marcus said, "but nothing you can't handle. You've survived worse." He wasn't wrong. Was Marcus's family really more frightening than death, than 6 years of losing yourself to a man who treated you like furniture? I already knew the answer to that. The welcome we received when we arrived at his grandfather's estate made the temperature at that table very clear before we even sat down. Still, we sat, and they brought out refreshments, and everyone smiled at each other like this was going to be a pleasant evening. The uncle, a thick-necked man named Gerald, started before the appetizers arrived. "So," he said, reaching for his wine glass, "Marcus tells us you were recently married." "Recently divorced," I said. "Yes," he said, drawing the word out slowly. "That's what I meant. How long were you married?" 6 years, I said. His wife Patricia, a thin woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, tilted her head. 6 years and it didn't work out. That's such a shame. What do you think went wrong?" "Patricia," Marcus said. "I'm just asking," Patricia said, hands up. "It's a reasonable question. We just want to understand who Marcus is bringing home. We're his family. We care about him." Gerald leaned back in his chair. "It's nothing personal, Claire. We just think Marcus deserves someone with a bit more stability, someone who hasn't already failed at the one thing marriage is supposed to require." "And what thing is that?" I said. "Commitment," Gerald said simply, like it was obvious. Marcus set down his fork. "Gerald, how many times did you bring home a child that wasn't Patricia's?" The table went silent. Patricia's smile stayed on her face, but her eyes went somewhere else entirely. Gerald's neck went red from the collar up. Before anyone could recover, the door opened. Daniel walked in first, his mother right behind him, Sarah waddling in last with one hand on her stomach and the other dabbing at her eyes like she had been crying in the car on the way over. I didn't move, didn't change my expression, but inside I understood immediately. Gerald had arranged this. This was his move. Bring in the ex-husband, the pregnant mistress, the grieving mother, and let them do the work so his own hands stayed clean. Marcus's grandfather hadn't said anything during the back and forth between Marcus and his uncle, but at that, he raised an eyebrow. "Who did you invite, Gerald?" Gerald straightened up. "Just some guests I thought were important, Father. You know how much I care about my nephew. If he ended up with the wrong person, I would be heartbroken." I rolled my eyes at that, and so did Marcus, and we caught ourselves at the same moment, both holding back laughter. Daniel's mother didn't waste a second. It was like she had been born for this exact moment. She walked straight to the head of the table and addressed Marcus's grandfather directly. "Sir, I apologize for the intrusion, but someone needs to tell you the truth about this woman before your grandson makes a terrible mistake." Marcus's grandfather said nothing. "That woman," she said, pointing at me without looking at me, "is barren. She cannot carry children. She could not give my son a family in 6 years of marriage, not one child, and now she is sitting at your table pretending to be something she is not." Sarah stepped forward, her voice soft and wobbling. "I didn't want to come here, I really didn't. I know how this looks. But I couldn't let Marcus find out the hard way the way my Daniel did. It wouldn't be fair to him. He deserves to know what he is getting into." Daniel stood beside them with his arms crossed, the smile of a man who believed he had just won something. Gerald set down his glass and put on a look of great personal suffering. "Father, how can we allow this, knowing what we know, if we let Marcus, my brother's only child, be with a woman who cannot bear heirs? That would be like destroying your late son's legacy entirely." Around the table heads nodded in agreement. Marcus went very still, then he stood up, and something about the way he did it made everyone stop nodding midway. "So what if she can't have children?" Marcus said, his voice quiet. "Does that diminish her worth as a woman?" Gerald cleared his throat. "Marcus, we are simply trying to look out for you. You're young, and right now you might think you don't want kids, but think of your grandfather. Think of the future." "You," Marcus said, cutting him off, "have brought 3 illegitimate children into this family in the last 10 years alone. I think grandfather has more than enough grandchildren to last him an eternity." Patricia went very still. Marcus turned to his uncle, cold and almost frightening. "Who exactly gave any of you the authority to decide what makes a person valuable? How can any of you open your mouths and tell me Claire isn't worth it because she can't have children? Maybe you tie the worth of a woman to her ability to conceive, but I don't. She is more than that. And the fact that all of you think otherwise is pathetic in its own way." Of course, when I saw this useless family appear in Marcus's grandfather's house, I knew this was what it was always going to be about, that I would have to sit here and hear it again, over and over, how I was less than a woman because I couldn't conceive in my marriage to Daniel. What I hadn't expected was Marcus standing up for me, or his words, seeing me as a person. What came out of his mouth next shocked me too. His voice dropped even quieter. "I have known Claire for many years and I have liked her, and I never once thought about her reproductive organs. So I am putting an end to this discussion right now. Anyone who uses the word barren in this room again, I will personally destroy. I swear it." The table went so quiet, I could have heard a pin drop. I put my hand on his arm, and he looked at me, the anger still sitting right behind his eyes. "Thank you, Marcus," I said quietly, then repeated it, meaning it more the second time. "Really, thank you." He was the first person to ever stand in front of a room and have my back without being asked. The first person to say he liked me and mean it without conditions. And just because of him, I had been able to change my fate. "I'll handle it from here," I whispered, then stood up and looked around the table. "I also invited a personal guest of my own." The door opened and a young man stepped in, tall, his eyes going straight to Sarah. A young man stepped in, tall, his eyes going straight to Sarah. "Sarah," he said, "why have you been ignoring my calls? You blocked me everywhere. I told my family about the baby. I am ready to take responsibility for our child." The table stopped breathing. Daniel turned to look at the young man slowly. "Who are you?" "I'm Sarah's boyfriend," he said, "and that child, the one in her belly, is mine." Daniel's face did several things in quick succession, then he crossed the room and grabbed the young man by his collar. "Stop lying! Who put you up to this? Who sent you here?" The young man pushed Daniel off him easily. "Sarah, what is going on? Who is this man?" Daniel turned to Sarah, crossing back to her, holding onto her arms. "Tell them he's lying, Sarah. Tell them right now." Sarah looked at the floor. Her silence was louder than anything else that had happened that evening. I let it sit for a moment, then I reached into my bag and placed a document on the table in front of Marcus's grandfather. "I don't know where the misinformation about me started, but I am not barren. I slid a copy across to Daniel's mother and Gerald. She crumpled the folder in her hands. That can't be true. I cut her off immediately. That report was done by the Reed family doctor at a renowned hospital, so you can trust it, since he has no reason to lie. Then I turned to Daniel's mother. Did you not know, I said pleasantly, that your son is the one who cannot have children, that your son is impotent? Even Sarah knows that, don't you, Sarah? I'm sorry, Daniel, Sarah said, barely above a whisper. Every eye in the room opened a little wider. Daniel let go of Sarah's arm. Marcus's grandfather had not moved, had not changed his expression once through all of it, but now he raised one hand and the staff appeared immediately. Remove them, he said simply, nodding toward Daniel, Sarah and Daniel's mother, and it happened quickly and without any ceremony at all. Then he turned to Gerald's side of the table. You invited strangers into my home, he said to Gerald, to slander your own nephew's fiancée with information that turns out to be false. He looked at Patricia, then back at Gerald. Get out, both of you. Gerald started to speak. Get out, his grandfather said again, and the tone of it closed the conversation entirely. When the room finally emptied, Marcus leaned over and said something quietly to his grandfather, then looked at me, and I understood. I stayed. Marcus's grandfather was a small man who had gotten smaller with age, but he sat at the head of that table like he had never once questioned his right to be there. He waited until the sound of the last footstep faded down the hall before he spoke. You have been through a great deal, he said. It wasn't a question, so I didn't treat it like one. He folded his hands on the table. I don't have much time left, and at my age you stop pretending otherwise. He looked at me steadily. Tonight I saw two things. I saw how much my grandson cares for you, and I saw that you can fight for yourself. He paused. What I need to know, he said, is whether you can fight for him too. I sat with that question, everything that had brought me to this table, everything I had survived and lost and rebuilt from nothing. And I looked at this old man who wasn't asking me for a performance or a promise. He was asking me for something true. I gave him my answer. Marcus was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and when I came out, he looked at me with that steady look of his. What did he say to you? He asked. I smiled, small and private. It's a secret, I said, and walked past him toward the door.